Dr. Jimmy Brown here. First of all, thanks so much for stopping by. Hope you enjoyed today's video. I do have one quick request. Please be sure to like, subscribe, as I'm trying to grow the channel. And if you have any topics you want me to cover, please be sure to shoot me a note and let me know. I'll put them in the queue. Can't promise how fast I'll get to them, but hey, I'm looking for ways to help everybody out who visits. So that's it. Hope all is well. Hope you enjoyed today's topic. Hello, everybody. Today's topic, we're going to talk about stress. Stress is something that we all experience at some point. Some people would argue there's more of it today than there has been last several years. Some people say stress is all socially constructed. Some people say stress is a real thing. Whatever the reason, it's something we all feel. We're going to talk today a little bit about some of the different ideas as far as what causes it, what it is, ways to deal with it, and just kind of give a basic overview of it. This is obviously, as all the videos, is not completely inclusive because there's literally entire books and classes on this, but just give you a nice little intro to the topic. So to begin with, what is stress? Stress is basically, it's a state that occurs when we're faced with demands we didn't expect. Change in some way. You think you're going down the road, you're going to have this job for 20 years, all of a sudden the job's gone. That causes stress. Even little things can cause stress. Like, you're at the airport and your plane's supposed to take off at 5 o'clock. Well, it's not going to take off until 7 p.m. That can cause stress. It's just your body's physiological reaction to some unexpected stimuli in the environment. From a physiological standpoint, stress causes things like increased heart rate, increased respiration, causes secretion of sweat, blood pressure, body temperature, muscle tensing. These are all the things we start to feel when we get stressed out. This is why people say, if you get stressed out, you're more likely to get sick. Because, again, these are things that make you more vulnerable. So what happens when this happens, when we get stressed out? Well, there's those who say that they work better under stress because what they're thinking about is some of these short-term benefits of stress. It creates focus. It creates reacting to threatening environments. We can take steps to remove ourselves. This is the whole fight or flight scenario. In the long term, stress does not do any good because what it creates is exhaustion, hypertension, ulcers, and it weakens our immune system. So when we think about it, the example I always use with my coaching clients is stress is really only useful for about the amount of time it takes to, say, outrun a bear, right? In about 30 minutes, either you've outrun that bear or the bear has eaten you. Past that, stress hits diminishing returns. So when we think about it, the folks who say they work better under stress, they may be more active, but they're usually not more productive. And so we want to think about ways to manage stress. Why do we do that? Well, let's think about the behavioral impacts of stress. People who are under stress, they're usually very short-tempered. They make erratic decisions. They miss important details. They say, "Oh, I'm really doing well with this," but no, they're just running around. They're not performing the way they should. So we want to learn how to manage that stress to avoid those issues. So before to manage it, we understand what causes it. So what are some of those key causes? Well, the first one, again, catastrophe, unpredictable events, wars, hurricanes, floods, disasters. These are catastrophic events that often cause people stress, even if it doesn't happen to them. You look at the news, you see catastrophic events. They put catastrophic events because on the news or on the internet because it gets more clicks. But when you see that, it may make you stressed out, even though you are not directly impacted by it. Obviously, if you're directly impacted by it, that's very stressful, but they usually impact everybody. Major life changes, again, changing job, starting a new school, birth of a child. All those major life events can cause stress. There's an old joke that when people get married, if they can make it through the stress of the wedding, their marriage it has a pretty good shot. It's a very stressful situation. Parents often say that, the stress the kids put them under, they probably would have, they have been with that kind of stress before the kids, they probably would have got to the kids, right? Because they're very stressful situations. Little life hassles can also cause it. Delays, again, the plain example, minor disagreements, similar aggravations. How those things come into us, it doesn't really matter why they're making us stressful, or if it's a big stress or a little stress, we have to recognize they make us stressed. And so the first part to managing it is recognizing it. Now, what makes us stressed out can vary throughout the course of our lives. For example, this comes from Ellis. It's a great book that'll be at the end if you ever want to look at it. Children 3 to 5, it's getting teased. Children 6 to 10, it's usually bad grades. Kids 11 to 15, they often cite pressure to do drugs or engage in other activities, peer pressure. Adolescents, they have trouble with school and work, finding work in some cases. Adults fighting with family members. Of course, a lot of times, a lot of the fights among adults are caused by things like lack of money, which is a big one for the elderly, or trouble at school or work. All these different things are different at different ages. And we always want to recognize that if someone's stressed out, we have to recognize that stress is real to them. Whether it makes sense or not, whether it's logical or not, if it's stressing them out, we have to recognize that stress is real to them. How do we think about the different impacts? Number one, pressure. If a demand is urgent, that usually causes lots of stress. Uncontrollability, the degree to which the person perceives, key word here, that they have the ability to influence an outcome usually makes them more stressed. One of the things we do in coaching, and I know my colleagues in clinical psychology do this as well, is people often feel stressed out if there's something about their life they feel they can't control. More importantly, they feel that they should control. So we often do the whole thing of, well, what can you control? How can you control it? And if you can't control it, then you really should not feel that pressure to be stressed out. Frustration. Again, when someone feels they're being blocked or prevented from achieving a goal, you look at somebody who's in the workplace, they feel they're not getting their chance to, show what they can do. They're not getting the promotion they feel they deserve. Those kinds of frustration cause lots and lots of stress. Aggression. People talk about toxic workplace environments being stressful. If you have a bully in the workplace or a toxic boss, obviously that's going to cause stress. So if we're dealing with someone who has any of these things, our first step is to really recognize what's causing that. If we're dealing with it ourselves, we want to first recognize what is causing that. Why? Because once we recognize that, we can then manage our response to it. One of the biggest things about stress is managing our response to it, because we have our uncontrollable responses. That's when things get into trouble. So, what are some of the responses to stress? The two most common ones: displaced aggression. That's the fight syndrome from the fight or flight. Taking it out on someone less threatening or more available target. Anybody who's got a family, if you've never gotten mad and taken it out on someone in your family, you're a better person than most of us, because that's a very common way. As you're stressed out, the family's there, boom, you take it out on them. Don't mean to, but it happens. Withdrawal. I often refer to this as kind of that flight, or as I call a lot of times in my coaching work, turtling up. Turtles, they kind of go back in their shells, they withdraw. Some folks get involved in fantasy role-playing games. They get involved in drug abuse. They get involved in apathy. There's a number of folks who get stressed out, and video game addiction is often driven by stress, because a person can retreat from the real world into that fantasy world. When we think about the displaced aggression, the conflict, there's some different types that we want to look at, or rather what causes the conflict. One is the approach, when the person must choose between two desirable goals. People, I was working a while back, they had 2 great job offers and they were totally stressed out. Most people would say, why are you stressed about that? Because other people don't have any job offers. Well, that's still stressful when you have too many options. There's a lot of psychologists showing that the more options you have, more good options you have, the more stressful it can be. Avoidance. A person must choose between 2 undesirable goals. I have a coaching client a while back, was dealing with a couple of very tricky situations, and the first thing I had to make him realize is saying, look, buddy, there is no good outcome to this. So what we must choose is the least negative, undesirable outcome. The next one we look at is avoidance, which is where there's a positive and a negative of both things. Maybe you get the great new job, but you have to move your family, and your family doesn't want to do that. Or maybe you stay with the current job, family's happy, but you're miserable. Those are the 2 things. We also have double avoidance and then multiple approach avoidance. Those are the same thing with multiple issues. So we want to think about what the kinds of stress are, what the conflict is, what causes it. When we think about general adaptation syndrome, there's really 3 steps our bodies go through. We have this. Number 1 is alarm. We react to the stress, our sympathetic nervous system kicks off, we're like, oh great, now what? We then usually go into resistance, which is we just don't want to do it. We're going to try to fight it off. We're going to try to avoid it. And eventually we physically get to exhaustion. People talk about high blood pressure. This is why people think of, stress is bad for your blood pressure. Why? Because the ongoing stress creates the chemicals that cause that. And that's why, again, very unhealthy for multiple reasons. Causes ulcers and things of that nature. Stress and personality. Not getting too much into this, what a lot of people get into is the idea of talk about type A, type B, and type C personality types. From a psychological standpoint, those aren't really real things. They were invented by cardiologists to try to predict what type of people are more likely to have cardiovascular events. And what he said was a type A person is probably usually more stressed out, more likely to get a cardiovascular event. Type B, less likely. It's a little too binary and a little too doesn't take the nuance into account of personality. One personality trait that does tend to impact stress management is hardiness, or as they call it in some sources, grit, which is saying, you know what, I can take this, I'm going to push through. People with low hardiness have more trouble with it. People with high hardiness have better with them. A similar version is optimism versus pessimism. If you walk into a stressful situation and you think, I can get out of this, there's a way to manage through it, you're going to do better with it if you think you're never going to leave that situation or you think it's never going to get better. It's my father used to have a great quote when I was doing sports. He's like, son, if you think you can't, you're right. That's that pessimistic view, which is if you think you can't succeed at something, you're absolutely correct. Whereas the optimist, you can think you can do it, but you got to figure out how. Again, we're working with other people, working with ourselves. We always want to think about what's the best way to go through it. It is that way worth the effort. The Jungian Big 5 models, if you look at those, there are some books about stress in those. I'm not going to get into detail of those here because there's a lot of different things about that, but that's just a couple different models there. How do we cope with stress? Problem focused, finding a way to fix it, that optimistic approach, saying, you know what, I'm going to find a way to either eliminate the source or reduce its impact. I've got a job that's stressful. What am I going to do? I'm going to find a new job. Now, sometimes you can't do that because, maybe you have a job that pays well and your family's expenses are high, or maybe you're not qualified to do anything else, or it's a bad economy or whatever reason that can impact it. But that's the problem focused approach. Now, the emotion focused approach is where you change how you perceive the stress, right? You look at it and you say, I can't control, I can't control what's going on, but I can't control how I perceive it. There's a guy named Tony Robbins who, if you ever had me in class or worked with me as a coach, I simultaneously, it drives me nuts because he takes a lot of really important psychological constructs and boils them down where he misses the important nuances. But one of the great things he says is, we can't control the world. We can only control ourselves and how we react to it. That's this emotional focus approach. It's kind of this saying, I'm not going to worry about it. If you've got a boss who's a jerk, aside from them doing things that are illegal, you just let him be a jerk and don't worry about it. It's very hard to do. Not everyone can do it. It takes a lot of different effort, but that's what some people do, is take that emotion focused approach. We talked a minute about the catastrophes, right? You say, you know what? I'm going to look at the news, but recognize that, there's a catastrophe going half the world away. It doesn't impact me directly. I mean, yeah, I'll donate some money or do what I can or try to be supportive, but I'm not going to let it stress me out. That's the emotional management piece. Another tool that's used is meditation. And I know some people have different ideas of that, but really there's different apps, different techniques, different schools of thought on this. But meditative techniques do tend to help us stress out less. And they do tend to help us not lose sight of those issues. So it's actually a good thing to work on. And if you look at, I have a video I'll be doing later on consciousness. We get those alpha wave states that tend to reduce the stress quite a bit from a neurobiological standpoint. There's also concentrated meditation, which again, this is much more of that very super focused, going to see like a Zen master, doing the konas, things like that. Those are the kinds of things that we get into. I'm not going to do that here. There's lots of people who know much more about that than I do. But there has been research showing that those states do tend to help us reduce stress and help us manage it. So that's been on the topic of stress. These are those 2 resources I brought up earlier. Hope you like the video. If you have questions, put them in the comments. I'll try to answer them. And that's it. Hope to see you next time.